The December wind howled across the Yorkshire moors with a ferocity that seemed to strip the very soul from the landscape, turning the rolling hills into a desolate expanse of white that stretched endlessly toward the grey horizon. Snow fell in thick, relentless curtains that obscured the familiar landmarks of Thornfield Estate, transforming the ancient manor house into a fortress of stone and ice that stood defiant against winter's assault. His Grace the Duke of Thornfield, Marcus Blackwood, stood at the tall windows of his study watching the storm rage across his lands with the same detached observation he applied to most aspects of his carefully ordered life. At 34, he had achieved everything society expected of a man in his position: wealth beyond measure, political influence that reached the highest levels of government, and a reputation for cold efficiency that made him both respected and feared in equal measure. What he had not achieved and had no intention of pursuing was a wife. Marcus had made this decision years ago, after watching his parents' marriage destroy both their lives through bitter recriminations, public scandals, and private cruelties that had turned Thornfield into a battlefield rather than a home. He had sworn then that he would never subject himself to such emotional chaos, would never allow another person to have the power to wound him as deeply as his parents had wounded each other. The arrangement suited him perfectly. He managed his estates with ruthless efficiency, conducted his business affairs with calculated precision, and maintained his social obligations with the minimum effort required to preserve his reputation. He had mistresses when physical needs demanded it, but he chose women who understood that his affections were not available for purchase at any price. What Marcus did not know, as he stood in his warm study contemplating the storm that raged beyond his windows, was that fate was about to deliver a challenge to his carefully constructed solitude in the form of a young woman who would appear in his life as suddenly and unexpectedly as the snow that was even now transforming his world. Miss Evangeline Hartwell was about to change everything he thought he knew about love, marriage, and the vulnerability that came with caring for another human being, and she was going to do it by collapsing unconscious in the snow outside his stables, forcing him to make a choice that would alter the course of both their lives forever. Stay with me until winter's chill becomes love's warmth, and a heart that refused to feel learns to burn. The discovery came at the worst possible moment, during the height of the storm that had been battering Thornfield for 3 days without respite. Marcus had ventured to the stables to check on his prize stallion, Tempest, who had been showing signs of restlessness that concerned the head groom. The wind was so fierce that it nearly knocked him from his feet as he fought his way across the courtyard, snow stinging his face like needles of ice. It was only by chance that he saw her, a dark shape against the white snow, crumpled near the stable doors like a discarded bundle of cloth. For a moment, Marcus thought it might be debris blown by the wind, but as he drew closer, his blood turned to ice as he realized it was a woman, unconscious and barely breathing, her lips blue with cold and her dark hair matted with snow. "Good God," he breathed, dropping to his knees beside her despite the storm that raged around them. She was young, perhaps 22 or 23, with delicate features that spoke of gentle breeding despite her current bedraggled state. Her clothes, though of good quality, were soaked through and offered no protection against the brutal cold that had clearly overcome her. Without hesitation, Marcus gathered her into his arms, surprised by how light she felt, how fragile she seemed against his chest. She was unconscious, but alive, her breathing shallow but steady, and he could feel the faint flutter of her pulse against his hand as he supported her head. "Jenkins!" he shouted over the wind as he burst through the stable doors with his unexpected burden. "Send word to the house immediately. We need hot water, blankets, and Mrs. Crawford's assistance at once." The head groom took one look at the unconscious woman in his master's arms and sprang into action with the efficiency that had made him invaluable to the Thornfield estate. Within minutes, a small army of servants was mobilized to assist in what had suddenly become a rescue operation. Marcus carried the mysterious woman to the house himself, his mind racing with questions that had no immediate answers. Who was she? How had she come to be at Thornfield in the middle of such a storm? Most importantly, what was he going to do with her once she regained consciousness? "Your Grace," said Mrs. Crawford, the housekeeper who had managed Thornfield since Marcus was a boy, "I've prepared the blue guest chamber and sent for Dr. Morrison. The poor child is half frozen. We must get her warm immediately." Marcus nodded, following the housekeeper up the grand staircase to the guest wing that had seen little use since his parents' deaths. The blue chamber was one of Thornfield's most comfortable rooms, with a large fireplace that Mrs. Crawford had already set blazing, and windows that looked out over the snow-covered gardens. "Your Grace," Mrs. Crawford said tactfully, "perhaps you should allow me and the maids to attend to the young lady's immediate needs. She will require assistance with her wet clothing." Marcus felt heat rise in his cheeks as he realized the impropriety of his continued presence. "Of course, Mrs. Crawford, please do everything necessary for her comfort. Cost is no object." "Naturally, Your Grace. We shall take excellent care of her." As Marcus reluctantly left the chamber, he found himself pacing the hallway outside like an expectant father, his mind churning with concern for a woman whose name he did not even know. The intensity of his worry surprised him. He had always prided himself on his emotional detachment, his ability to remain calm and rational in any crisis. Yet something about the fragile woman he had found in the snow had pierced through his carefully constructed defenses. Dr. Morrison arrived within the hour, despite the treacherous conditions that made travel nearly impossible. He was a man in his 60s who had served the Thornfield family for decades, and his expression was grave as he emerged from the guest chamber after his examination. "Your Grace," he said, settling into a chair by the fire in Marcus's study, "the young lady is suffering from severe exposure and exhaustion. Her condition is serious, but not immediately life-threatening, provided she receives proper care and warmth." "Will she recover fully?" Marcus asked, surprised by the urgency in his own voice. "I believe so, yes. She is young and appears to have been in good health before this ordeal. However, she will require several days of rest and careful monitoring. The cold has taken a considerable toll on her system." "And her identity? Did she say anything that might indicate who she is or how she came to be here?" Dr. Morrison shook his head. "She has not yet regained consciousness, Your Grace. When she does, we may learn more about her circumstances. Until then, I'm afraid we can only speculate." Marcus spent the remainder of that day and the next in a state of unusual agitation, finding himself unable to concentrate on his correspondence or estate business. He made frequent inquiries about his mysterious guest's condition, though he maintained a careful distance from her chamber to preserve propriety. It was Mrs. Crawford who brought him the news he had been waiting for. "Your Grace," she said, appearing in his study on the second morning after the rescue, "the young lady has awakened. She is still quite weak, but she is lucid and asking questions about where she is." "What sort of questions?" Marcus asked, setting down his pen with more haste than dignity. "She seems confused about how she came to be here, Your Grace. She remembers being caught in the storm, but little else. Dr. Morrison believes the cold may have affected her memory temporarily. Has she given her name?" "She says she is Miss Evangeline Hartwell, Your Grace. She appears to be a lady of gentle breeding, though she has not yet explained what brought her to Thornfield in such weather." Marcus felt something stir in his chest at the mention of her name, Evangeline. It suited her somehow, suggesting both strength and delicacy, like the woman herself. "Mrs. Crawford, please convey my compliments to Miss Hartwell and inform her that she is welcome to remain at Thornfield for as long as her recovery requires. Assure her that she is under my protection and that no harm will come to her while she is my guest." "Of course, Your Grace." "Shall I also inform her that you would like to speak with her when she feels well enough to receive visitors?" Marcus hesitated, recognizing that his desire to see Miss Hartwell again was perhaps stronger than propriety should allow. "Please tell her that I am available should she wish to discuss her circumstances, but that her comfort and recovery are my primary concerns." That afternoon, Marcus received a message that would begin the most significant chapter of his carefully ordered life. Miss Hartwell, through Mrs. Crawford, had requested an audience with His Grace at his earliest convenience. She wished to thank him personally for his kindness and to discuss her situation. Marcus found himself changing his clothes twice before making his way to the blue guest chamber, a level of vanity that was entirely unlike his usual practical approach to appearance. When he knocked softly on the door and was invited to enter, he was not prepared for the impact of seeing Evangeline Hartwell awake and aware. She was sitting up in bed, supported by pillows, her dark hair falling in soft waves around her shoulders. Her eyes, he discovered, were a remarkable shade of violet blue that seemed to hold depths he had not expected. Despite her obvious weakness, there was an alertness in her gaze that spoke of intelligence and strength of character. "Your Grace," she said, her voice soft but clear, "I cannot adequately express my gratitude for your kindness. Mrs. Crawford tells me that you found me in the snow and brought me to safety. I fear I would not have survived without your intervention." Marcus felt an unexpected tightness in his chest as he looked at her pale but lovely face. "Miss Hartwell, I am simply grateful that I found you in time. How are you feeling? Much better, thanks to your excellent care and Dr. Morrison's attention. I am still somewhat weak, but I believe I am past the worst of it. I am relieved to hear it. Marcus settled into the chair that had been placed beside the bed, maintaining a respectful distance while allowing for comfortable conversation. Miss Hartwell, if you feel able, I wonder if you might tell me something of your circumstances. How did you come to be at Thornfield in such weather? Evangeline's expression grew troubled, and she was quiet for a moment before responding. Your Grace, I fear my memory of recent events is somewhat unclear. I remember being caught in the storm, becoming lost and increasingly desperate as the cold overcame me, but the details of how I came to be in your area, they remain frustratingly vague. Dr. Morrison suggested that the exposure might have affected your memory temporarily. Perhaps it will return as you recover your strength. I hope so, Evangeline said with obvious concern. What I can tell you is that I was traveling to visit my aunt in Harrogate when the storm struck. My carriage, I believe there was an accident of some sort. The details are unclear, but I remember walking through the snow, becoming increasingly disoriented. Marcus felt a surge of protective instinct at the thought of this delicate woman struggling alone through the brutal storm. Miss Hartwell, you are welcome to remain at Thornfield for as long as necessary. We will make inquiries about your carriage and your servants, and we will ensure that word reaches your aunt about your safety. Your Grace, you are too kind. I cannot impose upon your hospitality indefinitely. You are not imposing, Marcus interrupted, surprised by the firmness in his own voice. Miss Hartwell, you are my guest, and you will remain so until you are fully recovered and your circumstances are resolved. I will not hear of any other arrangement. Evangeline studied his face with those remarkable violet eyes, and Marcus had the unsettling feeling that she was seeing more than he intended to reveal. Your Grace, I am grateful beyond words, but I must ask, is there no lady of the house who should be consulted about such arrangements? Your wife, perhaps? There is no wife, Marcus said, the words coming more abruptly than he had intended. I am unmarried, Miss Hartwell. Mrs. Crawford manages the household in the absence of a duchess. I see, Evangeline said softly, though something in her tone suggested that she found his unmarried state surprising. Then I am doubly grateful for your kindness, Your Grace. It cannot be entirely proper for an unmarried gentleman to extend such hospitality to an unaccompanied lady. Propriety is less important than human decency, Marcus replied firmly. Miss Hartwell, you were in mortal danger, and you remain in need of care and protection. Those needs supersede any concerns about social convention. As their conversation continued, Marcus found himself increasingly drawn to this mysterious woman who had appeared so suddenly in his life. Evangeline was clearly well-educated and well-bred, her conversation revealing both intelligence and a gentle humor that he found surprisingly appealing. There was something about her presence that seemed to warm the room in a way that had nothing to do with the blazing fireplace. Your Grace, Evangeline said as their visit drew to a close, might I ask about Thornfield? It is a magnificent estate, and I can see from my window that the grounds must be beautiful when not covered in snow. Thornfield has been in my family for over 2 centuries, Marcus replied, finding himself oddly pleased by her interest. The house was built by my ancestor, the first Duke of Thornfield, and each generation has added to its beauty and comfort. Perhaps, when you are stronger, you would like to see more of it. I should like that very much, Evangeline said with a smile that made Marcus's pulse quicken unexpectedly. Your Grace, thank you again for your kindness. I promise to be a model guest and to cause you no trouble during my stay. As Marcus left her chamber, he found himself thinking not about the inconvenience of having an unexpected guest, but about the pleasure he had found in her company. For the first time in years, Thornfield felt less like a fortress and more like a home, and he realized with some alarm that he was looking forward to seeing Miss Evangeline Hartwell again. The Duke, who had sworn never to marry, was about to discover that fate had a way of making such vows irrelevant, and that love could indeed arrive as suddenly and transformatively as a snowstorm, changing everything it touched. Over the following days, as the storm gradually abated and Evangeline grew stronger, Marcus found himself developing a routine that revolved around her recovery. He visited her chamber each morning and afternoon, ostensibly to inquire about her health, but increasingly because he found her company more engaging than any he had experienced in years. Your Grace, Evangeline said during one of these visits, I have been thinking about my situation, and I believe I should attempt to contact my aunt in Harrogate. She must be terribly worried about my failure to arrive. Of course, Marcus replied, though he felt an unexpected reluctance at the thought of her leaving Thornfield. "I will have my secretary compose a letter immediately, explaining your circumstances and assuring her of your safety." "Thank you. I have also been wondering about my carriage and my maid, Sarah. I pray they found shelter during the storm." Marcus had already made inquiries about any accidents or stranded travelers in the area, but so far his efforts had yielded no information about Evangeline's missing entourage. "I have men searching the roads between here and Harrogate, Miss Hartwell. If your carriage is to be found, we will find it." "You are too kind," Evangeline said softly. "Your Grace, I hope you know how grateful I am for everything you have done. Most gentlemen would have simply sent me to the nearest inn once the immediate danger had passed. Most gentlemen would not have found themselves hosting a guest under such extraordinary circumstances," Marcus replied. "Miss Hartwell, I want you to understand that your presence here is not a burden. Indeed, I find myself, that is, Thornfield seems less empty with a guest in residence." Evangeline looked at him with those perceptive, violet eyes, and Marcus had the uncomfortable feeling that she was seeing past his carefully maintained facade to something he preferred to keep hidden. "Your Grace, if I may be so bold, you seem to live a rather solitary life for a man of your position. Do you not find such isolation lonely?" The question caught Marcus off guard, forcing him to confront feelings he had spent years avoiding. "I have found solitude preferable to the complications that come with closer human connections, Miss Hartwell. My life is ordered, peaceful, and free from the emotional turmoil that seems to plague so many marriages and friendships." "But surely there are connections that bring joy rather than turmoil?" Evangeline asked gently. "Friendships based on mutual respect and affection? The possibility of a marriage founded on genuine compatibility rather than mere convenience?" Marcus felt heat rise in his cheeks at her direct questioning. "Miss Hartwell, I have observed that such idealistic notions rarely survive the realities of daily life. People disappoint each other, betray each other, cause each other pain in ways that can be difficult to forgive or forget." "You speak as if from personal experience," Evangeline observed with gentle perception. "Perhaps I do," Marcus admitted, surprised by his own honesty. "My parents' marriage was instructive in the ways that love can become hatred, that passion can become cruelty. I decided long ago that I preferred the safety of emotional distance to the risks of emotional investment." Evangeline was quiet for a moment, her expression thoughtful. "Your Grace, I am sorry that your parents' example was so painful, but surely you must see that not all marriages follow such a pattern, that it is possible for two people to find happiness together rather than misery?" "Perhaps," Marcus said carefully. "But Miss Hartwell, I have found that the cost of being wrong about such matters is too high to justify the risk." "And what of the cost of being right?" Evangeline asked softly. "What of the cost of a life lived in isolation, of never knowing the joy that comes from sharing one's thoughts, dreams, and daily experiences with someone who cares?" The question hung in the air between them, and Marcus found himself without a ready answer. For years he had been content with his solitary existence, convinced that he had chosen the wiser path. But something about Evangeline's gentle challenge made him question whether wisdom and happiness were necessarily the same thing. "Miss Hartwell," he said finally, "you speak as if you have experience of such happiness yourself." Evangeline's expression grew wistful. "I have been fortunate in my friendships, Your Grace, and I have observed marriages that seem to bring great joy to both partners. My own parents, before their deaths, were devoted to each other in a way that made their love a source of strength rather than weakness." "You are an orphan?" Marcus asked, feeling a surge of sympathy for this woman who had already endured so much loss. "My parents died in a carriage accident 3 years ago," Evangeline said quietly. "Since then I have lived with various relatives, most recently with my aunt in London. The visit to Harrogate was meant to be a respite from certain pressures regarding my future." "What sort of pressures?" Marcus found himself asking, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "The sort that face any unmarried woman of 23, with a modest inheritance and no immediate family to protect her interests," Evangeline replied with a rueful smile. "My aunt is convinced that I must marry soon, before I become completely unmarketable. She has been energetic in her efforts to find me a suitable husband." Marcus felt an unexpected surge of anger at the thought of Evangeline being pressured into an unwanted marriage. "And you? What are your feelings about such arrangements?" "I believe that marriage should be based on mutual affection and respect, rather than mere convenience or financial necessity," Evangeline said firmly. "I would rather remain unmarried than enter into a union that offers no prospect of genuine happiness." "A romantic notion," Marcus observed, though his tone was not dismissive. Perhaps, Evangeline agreed. But, Your Grace, if we cannot hope for happiness in our most intimate relationships, what hope do we have for happiness at all? As Marcus left her chamber that afternoon, he found himself deeply unsettled by their conversation. Evangeline's questions had forced him to examine assumptions he had held for years, to consider whether his carefully constructed solitude was truly the blessing he had convinced himself it was. That evening, as he sat alone in his study with only a brandy snifter for company, Marcus found himself thinking not about estate business or political matters, but about violet eyes and gentle questions that had shaken the foundations of his carefully ordered world. For the first time in years, Thornfield felt empty rather than peaceful, quiet rather than serene. And for the first time since his parents' deaths, Marcus began to wonder whether he had been wrong to equate safety with happiness, whether his fear of emotional pain had cost him more than he had realized. The Duke, who had sworn never to marry, was beginning to understand that some vows were made to be broken, and that the woman recovering in his guest chamber might be exactly the person to help him break them. As Evangeline's strength returned, and the weather cleared enough to allow movement about the estate, Marcus found himself offering to show her the parts of Thornfield that had been in his family for generations. What began as simple courtesy evolved into something far more significant as they spent hours walking through snow-covered gardens, exploring the portrait gallery, and discussing the history that surrounded them. "Your Grace," Evangeline said, as they stood before a portrait of the first Duke of Thornfield, "he has your eyes, that same intensity, that same watchfulness." Marcus studied the painting with new interest, seeing it through her eyes. "My father always said that the Blackwood men were cursed with the ability to see too much and feel too little. Perhaps that is what you observe. I think you feel more than you allow yourself to acknowledge," Evangeline said softly, her perceptive gaze fixed on his face rather than the portrait. "For Your Grace, the man who rescued me from the snow, who has shown such kindness to a stranger, that man feels a great deal." Marcus felt his carefully maintained composure beginning to crack under her gentle scrutiny. "Miss Hartwell, you mistake basic human decency for something more significant." "Do I?" Evangeline asked, moving closer to examine another portrait. "Your Grace, you have opened your home to me, ensured my comfort, provided for my every need without thought of inconvenience or impropriety. You have spent hours in my company, sharing your thoughts about literature, politics, and philosophy. You have shown me kindness that goes far beyond what duty requires. Perhaps I am simply unused to having a guest who provides such stimulating conversation," Marcus said, though even to his own ears the explanation sounded inadequate. "Perhaps," Evangeline agreed with a smile that suggested she was not entirely convinced. "Your Grace, might I ask you something that may be impertinent?" "You may ask anything you wish," Marcus replied, surprised by his own willingness to be vulnerable with this woman. "Why have you never married? Surely a man of your position and attributes would have had numerous opportunities to form advantageous connections." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, considering how much truth he was willing to share. "Miss Hartwell, I have had opportunities, yes, but I've never encountered a woman who made me believe that marriage could be anything other than a necessary evil. And what would such a woman need to possess to change your mind?" Evangeline asked, her tone carefully neutral. "Intelligence, certainly. The ability to engage in meaningful conversation about subjects beyond fashion and gossip. Strength of character that would not crumble under pressure or adversity. Genuine kindness, rather than calculated charm." Marcus paused, realizing that he was describing qualities that Evangeline herself possessed in abundance. Most importantly, she would need to be someone I could trust completely, someone who would never use my feelings as a weapon against me. "Those are not unreasonable requirements," Evangeline observed. "Your Grace, do you truly believe that no woman exists who could meet such standards?" Marcus looked at her, standing in the soft light that filtered through the tall windows, her dark hair gleaming and her violet eyes warm with understanding. For a moment he allowed himself to imagine what it might be like to have such a woman as his wife, to share his thoughts and dreams with someone who would value them rather than mock them. "Perhaps such a woman exists," he said quietly. "But Miss Hartwell, even if she did, there remains the question of whether she would want a man who has spent years building walls around his heart." "Those walls were built for protection," Evangeline said gently. "But Your Grace, protection that keeps out pain also keeps out joy. Perhaps it is time to consider whether the cost of such safety is worth the price." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Mrs. Crawford, who brought news that would complicate the growing intimacy between them. "Your Grace," the housekeeper said with obvious concern. "I have received a reply to the letter we sent to Miss Hartwell's aunt in Harrogate. I'm afraid the news is unexpected." "What sort of news?" Marcus asked, though he felt a chill of premonition. "Miss Hartwell's aunt writes that she has no niece by that name, Your Grace. She says she was not expecting any visitor and knows nothing of the circumstances described in our letter." Marcus felt the ground shift beneath his feet as he turned to look at Evangeline, whose face had gone pale with shock and confusion. "That is impossible," Evangeline said, her voice barely above a whisper. I was traveling to visit Aunt Margaret in Harrogate. I remember making the arrangements, packing my things." "Miss Hartwell," Marcus said gently, moving closer to offer support. "Perhaps there has been some confusion. Could you have been mistaken about your destination? Or perhaps your aunt's name?" I do not know," Evangeline admitted, her distress evident. "Your Grace, my memory of recent events remains unclear, but I was certain about my aunt. How could I be wrong about something so fundamental?" Mrs. Crawford cleared her throat delicately. "Your Grace, there is more. I took the liberty of making additional inquiries about missing persons or carriage accidents in the area. No one matching Miss Hartwell's description has been reported missing, and no accidents involving a lady's carriage have been discovered." Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter weather. "What are you suggesting, Mrs. Crawford?" "I am suggesting, Your Grace, that Miss Hartwell's circumstances may be more complicated than we initially understood. Without confirmation of her identity or her intended destination, we cannot be certain of anything, really." Evangeline sank into the nearest chair, her face pale with shock and growing fear. "Your Grace, I do not understand what is happening. I know who I am, I know my own name, but everything else seems to be wrong somehow." Marcus felt a surge of protective instinct that surprised him with its intensity. "Miss Hartwell, whatever the confusion about your circumstances, you are safe here. We will continue to make inquiries, and we will resolve this mystery." "But Your Grace," Evangeline said, her voice trembling slightly, "what if I am not who I think I am? What if my memories are false somehow? What if I am someone you should not be harboring in your home?" "You are a lady in distress who required assistance," Marcus said firmly. "Whatever the confusion about your background, that fundamental fact remains unchanged. You will continue to be my guest until we understand your situation completely." After Mrs. Crawford departed, Marcus and Evangeline sat in troubled silence, both grappling with the implications of this unexpected development. "Your Grace," Evangeline said finally, "I understand if you feel that my continued presence here is inappropriate, given the uncertainty about my identity. I could seek accommodation elsewhere." "Absolutely not," Marcus interrupted with more force than he had intended. "Miss Hartwell, you are not leaving Thornfield until we have answers. I will not have you wandering the countryside with no clear understanding of your circumstances or your safety. But the impropriety is less important than your welfare," Marcus said firmly. "Miss Hartwell, I have come to care about what happens to you. I will not abandon you to face this confusion alone." Evangeline looked at him with those remarkable violet eyes, and Marcus saw gratitude there, but also something deeper that made his pulse quicken. "Your Grace," she said softly, I have come to care about you as well. More than is perhaps wise, given my uncertain circumstances." The admission hung in the air between them, fraught with implications that neither was quite ready to address directly. "Evangeline," Marcus said, using her given name for the first time, "whatever your circumstances, whatever the truth about your past, I want you to know that you have brought something to Thornfield that has been missing for years." "What is that?" "Life," Marcus said simply. "Warmth. The sense that this house is a home rather than simply a fortress. You have made me question assumptions I have held for years, made me wonder whether I have been wrong to value safety over happiness." "Marcus," Evangeline whispered, her use of his name sending a thrill through him that he had never experienced before. I feel the same. Whatever brought me to Thornfield, whatever the truth about my past, I cannot regret the circumstances that led me to you." They were sitting closer now, drawn together by an attraction that seemed to transcend the mystery surrounding her identity. Marcus found himself studying the delicate curve of her cheek, the way the firelight caught the auburn highlights in her dark hair, the soft fullness of her lips that seemed to invite his kiss. "Evangeline," he said, his voice rough with emotion, I find myself in an impossible situation. I am falling in love with a woman whose very identity is in question, whose past is a mystery, whose future is uncertain. And I am falling in love with a man who has sworn never to marry, who values his solitude above all else, who has every reason to send me away rather than risk the complications I represent, Evangeline replied with equal honesty. What are we to do? Marcus asked, though he already knew the answer in his heart. We are to follow our hearts rather than our fears, Evangeline said, reaching out to touch his hand with gentle fingers. Marcus, whatever the truth about my past, I know who I am in this moment. I am a woman who has found love where she least expected it, with a man who has shown her kindness, protection, and genuine affection. And I am a man who has discovered that all his careful plans and rational decisions mean nothing when faced with a woman who makes him want to be better than he is, Marcus replied, turning his hand to capture hers. Evangeline, I love you. Whatever the consequences, whatever the complications, I love you. When he kissed her, it was with all the passion and tenderness that he had spent years denying himself, and when she responded with equal fervor, it was with the trust and affection that she had never expected to find with a man who had seemed so determined to remain alone. The Duke, who had sworn never to marry, had fallen completely and irrevocably in love with a woman whose very identity was a mystery. But as they held each other in the firelight of Thornfield's portrait gallery, surrounded by the faces of his ancestors, who had loved and lost and loved again, Marcus knew that some risks were worth taking, some mysteries were worth solving, and some loves were worth fighting for regardless of the obstacles they might face. The question was whether their love would survive the truth about Evangeline's past, whatever that truth might prove to be. The answer to the mystery of Evangeline's identity came 3 weeks later, in the form of a visitor whose arrival would test everything that Marcus and Evangeline had built together. Lord Pemberton appeared at Thornfield on a crisp January morning, accompanied by a man whose presence sent a chill through Marcus that had nothing to do with the winter weather. Mr. Silas Blackthorne was a private investigator whose reputation for finding missing persons was matched only by his discretion in handling delicate family matters. His presence at Thornfield could mean only one thing. Someone was looking for Evangeline. Blackwood, Lord Pemberton said, as they settled in Marcus's study with brandy and the kind of serious expressions that suggested unpleasant news. I'm afraid I bring rather disturbing information about your mysterious guest. Marcus felt his jaw tighten with apprehension. What sort of information? The sort that suggests Miss Hartwell's circumstances are far more complicated than either of you realized, Mr. Blackthorne said, producing a leather portfolio from his coat. Your Grace, I have been engaged by Lord Ashworth to locate his missing ward, a young lady who disappeared from his London residence 3 weeks ago, under circumstances that caused considerable alarm. And you believe this missing ward is Miss Evangeline Ashworth? Mr. Blackthorne confirmed, opening his portfolio to reveal a detailed description that matched Evangeline perfectly. Age 23, dark hair, violet eyes, approximately 5 feet 4 inches in height. She was last seen leaving Lord Ashworth's residence in the company of her maid, ostensibly to visit a modiste. Neither she nor her maid returned, and no trace of them has been found until now. Marcus felt the blood drain from his face as he processed this information. You are saying that the woman I know as Evangeline Hartwell is actually Evangeline Ashworth, Lord Ashworth's ward. I am saying that the description matches perfectly, and that Lord Ashworth is most anxious to recover his ward. Mr. Blackthorne replied carefully, Your Grace, might I be permitted to see the young lady in question? A positive identification would resolve the matter quickly. Before we proceed, Marcus said, his protective instincts fully aroused, I need to understand Lord Ashworth's relationship to the young lady. What are his intentions regarding her welfare? Lord Pemberton and Mr. Blackthorne exchanged glances that suggested Marcus's question had touched on delicate territory. Your Grace, Lord Pemberton said carefully, Lord Ashworth is the young lady's legal guardian, appointed by her late father's will. He has full authority over her person and property until she reaches the age of 25 or marries with his consent. And his plans for her future? Marcus asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Lord Ashworth has arranged an advantageous marriage for his ward, Mr. Blackthorne said, with professional neutrality. The young lady was to be married within the month to Sir Reginald Worthington, a union that would benefit both families considerably. Marcus felt sick as he realized the implications. And Miss Ashworth's feelings about this arrangement were apparently strong enough to prompt her disappearance, Mr. Blackthorne observed dryly. Your Grace, Lord Ashworth believes that his ward may have been influenced by romantic notions that led her to reject a perfectly suitable match. He is most anxious to recover her before any scandal can attach to the family name. I see, Marcus said, his mind racing with the implications of this revelation. Evangeline, or Evangeline Ashworth, as she apparently was, had not been traveling to visit an aunt when the storm struck. She had been fleeing an unwanted marriage, running from a guardian who viewed her as a commodity to be traded for family advantage. "Your Grace," Lord Pemberton said gently, "I understand that you have developed a concern for the young lady's welfare during her stay here, but you must understand that Lord Ashworth has legal authority over her, and that harboring her against his wishes could create significant difficulties for you." "What sort of difficulties?" Marcus asked, though his tone suggested he was prepared to face whatever consequences might arise. "The sort that could damage your reputation and political standing," Mr. Blackthorne said bluntly. "Your Grace, Lord Ashworth is a powerful man with considerable influence. If he chooses to make an issue of his ward's extended stay at Thornfield, it could be most unpleasant for all concerned." Marcus stood and moved to the window, looking out at the snow-covered grounds where he had walked with Evangeline just that morning, discussing poetry and philosophy and the possibility of a future together. Now everything had changed, complicated by legal realities and family obligations that threatened to tear them apart. "Gentlemen," he said finally, "I appreciate the information you have brought me. However, I will not simply hand Miss Ashworth over to her guardian without understanding her wishes in the matter. She is not a piece of property to be reclaimed without regard for her feelings or her welfare." "Your Grace," Mr. Blackthorne said carefully, "with respect, the law does not require Miss Ashworth's consent to her guardian's decisions. Lord Ashworth has full authority to determine her residence and her marriage arrangements. The law may not require her consent," Marcus replied with quiet determination, "but I do. I will speak with Miss Ashworth about her circumstances, and I will ensure that she understands her options before any decisions are made about her future." After his visitors departed, promising to return the following day for Evangeline's answer, Marcus found himself facing the most difficult conversation of his life. He made his way to the morning room where Evangeline was reading, her face serene and lovely in the afternoon sunlight that streamed through the tall windows. "Marcus," she said with the warm smile that never failed to make his heart race, "you look troubled. Is something wrong?" "Evangeline," Marcus said, settling into the chair beside her with obvious reluctance, "I have received some information about your identity that I must share with you, though I fear it will be distressing." Her smile faded as she saw the gravity in his expression. "What sort of information?" "Your name is not Evangeline Hartwell," Marcus said gently. "You are Evangeline Ashworth, ward of Lord Ashworth of London. You disappeared from his residence 3 weeks ago, apparently to avoid a marriage he had arranged for you." Evangeline stared at him in shock, the book falling from her nerveless fingers. That cannot be true. I remember my name, my circumstances." "The memories you have may be confused by the trauma of your experience in the storm," Marcus said carefully. "Evangeline, a private investigator has been searching for you. Your guardian is demanding your return, and he has legal authority to enforce that demand." "My guardian," Evangeline repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. "Marcus, I remember now. Not everything, but enough. Lord Ashworth, the marriage to Sir Reginald, my desperation to escape." She looked up at him with eyes bright with unshed tears. "I ran away, didn't I? I was so frightened of that marriage that I ran away into a snowstorm." "It appears so," Marcus confirmed gently. "Evangeline, what do you remember about your guardian, about the circumstances that led you to flee?" Evangeline was quiet for a long moment, her expression troubled as she struggled to piece together her fragmented memories. "Lord Ashworth is my father's cousin, appointed as my guardian when my parents died. He has always been cold, calculating. He views my inheritance as his to manage, and my marriage as a business transaction to be negotiated for maximum advantage." "And Sir Reginald Worthington?" "A man twice my age with a reputation for cruelty to his servants and his first wife," Evangeline said with obvious revulsion. "Marcus, I cannot marry such a man. I would rather die than submit to such a fate." Marcus felt his heart clench at the desperation in her voice. "Evangeline, you will not have to face that choice alone. But I need you to understand the legal realities we face. Your guardian has the authority to compel your return and to enforce the marriage arrangements he has made." "And you?" Evangeline asked, her violet eyes searching his face. "Marcus, what will you do when they come to take me away?" Marcus took her hands in his, feeling their trembling as she struggled to control her emotions. "I will do whatever is necessary to protect you, even if it means defying legal authority and social convention." But the consequences for you are irrelevant compared to your safety and happiness, Marcus said firmly. Evangeline, I love you. I will not allow you to be forced into a marriage that would destroy your spirit and your life. Marcus, I love you too, but I cannot allow you to sacrifice your reputation and your position for my sake. Lord Ashworth is a powerful man who could make your life very difficult. Then we must find another solution, Marcus said with growing determination. Evangeline, there must be some way to free you from your guardian's authority legally, some alternative to the marriage he has arranged. What sort of alternative? Marcus was quiet for a moment, considering possibilities that seemed both obvious and impossible. Marriage to someone else, he said finally. Evangeline, if you were to marry another man before your guardian could enforce his arrangements, it would nullify his authority over you. Marriage to whom? Evangeline asked, though something in her tone suggested she already knew the answer. To me, Marcus said simply. Evangeline, I am asking you to marry me, not because of your circumstances, not to solve a legal problem, but because I love you and want to spend the rest of my life with you. Evangeline stared at him in amazement. Marcus, you swore never to marry. You said that the risks of emotional entanglement were too great. I said those things before I met you, Marcus interrupted. Evangeline, you have shown me that love is not a weakness to be avoided, but a strength to be embraced. You have made me want to be the man you deserve rather than the isolated duke I thought I wanted to be. But the scandal, the complications, will be worth facing if it means I can call you my wife, Marcus said without hesitation. Evangeline, I am not asking you to marry me to escape your guardian. I am asking you to marry me because I cannot imagine my life without you in it. Evangeline felt tears streaming down her cheeks as she looked at this remarkable man who was willing to sacrifice everything he had valued for her sake. Marcus, yes, I will marry you, not just to escape Lord Ashworth, but because I love you more than I ever thought possible. When Marcus kissed her, it was with the passion of a man who had found his heart's desire and the determination of a duke prepared to fight the world to keep it. And when Evangeline responded with equal fervor, it was with the trust of a woman who had found not just love, but true partnership with a man worthy of both. But even as they held each other in the afternoon sunlight, both understood that their battle was just beginning. Lord Ashworth would not give up his ward easily, and the legal and social obstacles they faced were formidable. The question was whether their love was strong enough to overcome the forces arrayed against them, and whether the Duke, who had sworn never to marry, would be able to protect the woman who had taught him that some vows were meant to be broken. The confrontation with Lord Ashworth came the following morning, arriving in the form of a man whose cold authority filled Marcus's study like a winter storm. Lord Ashworth was a tall, spare man in his 50s, with grey eyes that held no warmth, and a manner that suggested he was accustomed to having his will obeyed without question. Your Grace, he said without preamble, I have come to collect my ward, who I understand has been residing at Thornfield under irregular circumstances. Lord Ashworth, Marcus replied with careful formality, Miss Ashworth is indeed my guest, and she will remain so until her circumstances are resolved to her satisfaction. Her satisfaction is not relevant to this matter, Lord Ashworth said coldly. Your Grace, I am Evangeline's legal guardian with full authority over her person and property. I am not here to negotiate. I am here to reclaim what is mine. Miss Ashworth is not property to be reclaimed, Marcus said, his voice carrying a warning that made Lord Ashworth's eyes narrow. She is a young woman with rights and feelings that deserve consideration. She is a foolish girl who has allowed romantic nonsense to override her duty to her family, Lord Ashworth replied dismissively. Your Grace, I understand that Evangeline may have imposed upon your hospitality with tales of distress, but I assure you that her circumstances are entirely of her own making. Her circumstances are the result of your attempt to force her into an unwanted marriage, Marcus said bluntly. Lord Ashworth, Miss Ashworth fled your house because she could not bear the prospect of marrying Sir Reginald Worthington. Surely that should tell you something about the suitability of the match. It tells me that she has been influenced by romantic novels and unrealistic expectations, Lord Ashworth said with obvious irritation. Your Grace, Sir Reginald is a perfectly suitable husband who will provide Evangeline with security and social position. Her personal feelings about the matter are irrelevant. Her personal feelings are the only thing that matters, Marcus replied firmly. Lord Ashworth, I will not allow Miss Ashworth to be forced into a marriage that would make her miserable. You will not allow? Lord Ashworth's voice rose with indignation. Your Grace, you have no authority in this matter. Evangeline is my ward, and I will dispose of her as I see fit." "Actually," came a new voice from the doorway, "that is no longer true." Both men turned to see Evangeline entering the study, her bearing regal despite the obvious tension of the situation. She was followed by Dr. Morrison, who carried a leather document case that suggested official business. "Evangeline," Lord Ashworth said with cold authority, "you will return to London with me immediately. This foolishness has gone on long enough." "I will not be returning to London with you, uncle," Evangeline said with quiet dignity. "I am no longer your ward, and I am no longer subject to your authority." "What nonsense is this?" Lord Ashworth demanded. "The nonsense of legal marriage," Dr. Morrison said, producing a document from his case. "Lord Ashworth, I have just performed the marriage ceremony between His Grace the Duke of Thornfield and Miss Evangeline Ashworth, now the Duchess of Thornfield. The marriage is legal, binding, and properly witnessed." Lord Ashworth stared at the marriage certificate in shock, his face cycling through disbelief, rage, and calculation. "This is impossible. Evangeline could not marry without my consent." "Actually, she could," Dr. Morrison said with professional calm. "While you retained authority over Miss Ashworth's marriage until she reached 25, that authority was not absolute. A marriage performed under circumstances of duress, such as fleeing an unwanted union, can be legally valid if properly witnessed and documented. Furthermore," Marcus added with quiet satisfaction, "the marriage has been consummated, making it indissoluble under both civil and ecclesiastical law." Lord Ashworth's face turned an alarming shade of purple as he realized the full implications of what had occurred. "This is outrageous. Your Grace, you have stolen my ward, destroyed a carefully arranged alliance, and made a mockery of proper legal procedure." "I have married the woman I love," Marcus replied calmly. "Lord Ashworth, your authority over Evangeline ended the moment she became my wife. She is now the Duchess of Thornfield, and any concerns about her welfare or her future are mine to address." "You think you have been clever," Lord Ashworth said, his voice shaking with rage, "but you have no idea what you have done. Sir Reginald will not accept this humiliation quietly. He has already paid a substantial bride price for Evangeline, and he will expect compensation for his losses." "Then he will be disappointed," Marcus said without concern. "Lord Ashworth, any financial arrangements you made regarding Miss Ashworth's marriage were made without her consent and are therefore invalid. Sir Reginald has no legal claim to compensation." "Legal claims are not the only kind that matter," Lord Ashworth said ominously. "Your Grace, you have made powerful enemies today. Sir Reginald has connections throughout the government and the military. He will not forget this insult, and neither will I." "Are you threatening me?" Marcus asked, his voice carrying the kind of quiet menace that had made him feared in political circles. "I am promising you that there will be consequences for this day's work," Lord Ashworth replied. "Your Grace, you may have won this particular battle, but the war is far from over." After Lord Ashworth's departure, Marcus and Evangeline found themselves alone in the study, the marriage certificate lying on the desk between them, like a shield against the world. "Marcus," Evangeline said softly, "are you certain about what we have done?" Lord Ashworth was not making idle threats. He and Sir Reginald do have the power to make your life difficult. "They have the power to try," Marcus corrected, moving to take her in his arms. "Evangeline, I am the Duke of Thornfield, with my own connections and my own influence. I am not without resources to protect what is mine." "And what is yours?" Evangeline asked with a smile that made his heart race. "You," Marcus said simply. "My wife, my Duchess, my heart's desire." "Evangeline, I would face a dozen Lord Ashworths to keep you safe and happy, even though our marriage began under such irregular circumstances." "Our marriage began with love," Marcus said firmly. "The circumstances that brought us together may have been unusual, but what we feel for each other is real and lasting. Evangeline, I have never been more certain of anything in my life." As they held each other in the afternoon sunlight that streamed through the study windows, both understood that they had crossed a threshold from which there was no return. They were married now, bound together by law and love, but they were also facing enemies who would not easily accept their union. The challenges began almost immediately. Within a week of their marriage, Marcus began receiving visits from government officials who questioned his judgment, business associates who expressed concern about his stability, and social acquaintances who wondered aloud about the propriety of his hasty marriage to a woman of questionable background. "Your Grace," said Lord Pemberton during one particularly uncomfortable visit, "I hope you understand that society is talking about your recent marriage. There are those who question whether the Duchess's circumstances were entirely what they seemed. What sort of questions? Marcus asked, though his tone suggested that he was not particularly interested in society's opinions. Questions about her true identity, her reasons for fleeing Lord Ashworth's protection, the speed with which your courtship progressed. Lord Pemberton shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Marcus, there are rumors that your wife may have engineered her rescue in order to entrap you into marriage. Marcus felt his temper rise at the suggestion. Lord Pemberton, anyone who suggests that my wife deliberately collapsed in a snowstorm in order to manipulate me is either a fool or a malicious gossip. I will not tolerate such speculation about the Duchess of Thornfield. Of course not, Lord Pemberton said quickly. Marcus, I am not endorsing these rumors. I am simply warning you that they exist. Lord Ashworth and Sir Reginald have been quite vocal about their version of events, and their influence is considerable. What version of events? That your wife is a scheming adventuress who used her guardian's kindness against him, who fled an advantageous marriage in pursuit of a better one, who deliberately placed herself in your path in order to compromise you into offering for her. Marcus stood abruptly, his face dark with anger. That is the most ridiculous calumny I have ever heard. Anyone who knows Evangeline would understand that she is incapable of such calculation. But Marcus, most people do not know her, Lord Pemberton pointed out gently. She appeared in your life under mysterious circumstances, married you with unusual speed, and has no family or friends to vouch for her character. In the absence of other information, people will believe what they are told by those who claim to know her best. The truth of this observation hit Marcus like a physical blow. Evangeline had no one to defend her reputation except himself, and his own obvious infatuation with her would be seen as evidence of her manipulative skills rather than proof of her genuine worth. What do you suggest I do? Marcus asked, though he already knew the answer would be unacceptable. Distance yourself from the controversy, Lord Pemberton said carefully. Take your wife to the continent for an extended honeymoon. Allow time for the gossip to die down, and for other scandals to capture society's attention. When you return, present a united front and refuse to discuss the circumstances of your courtship. And if I refuse to run from malicious gossip, then you risk seeing your political career destroyed, your social standing damaged, and your wife subjected to the kind of scrutiny that could make her life unbearable, Lord Pemberton said bluntly. Marcus, I am trying to help you understand the realities of the situation you face. That evening, Marcus shared this conversation with Evangeline as they sat together in the drawing room, watching the fire crackle in the grate while snow continued to fall outside the tall windows. Marcus, Evangeline said after he had finished his account, perhaps Lord Pemberton is right. Perhaps we should consider leaving England until this controversy subsides. I will not be driven from my own country by lies and gossip, Marcus said firmly. Evangeline, we have done nothing wrong. We fell in love and married. There is no shame in that, regardless of what our enemies might claim. But if staying means damage to your reputation and your career, then we will face that damage together, Marcus interrupted. Evangeline, I will not allow fear of gossip to dictate our choices. We are married, we are happy, and we will not hide from the world as if we had something to be ashamed of. Evangeline moved closer to him on the sofa, taking his hand in hers with gentle pressure. Marcus, I love you for your courage and your loyalty, but I cannot bear the thought that your association with me might destroy everything you have worked to build. You have not destroyed anything, Marcus said, raising her hand to his lips for a gentle kiss. Evangeline, you have given me something far more valuable than political influence or social standing. You have given me love, happiness, and a reason to use my position for something meaningful. What do you mean? Marcus was quiet for a moment, considering words that would express the transformation that had occurred within him since her arrival at Thornfield. I mean that before I met you, I used my wealth and influence primarily for my own benefit. I managed my estates efficiently, conducted my business profitably, and fulfilled my social obligations adequately. But I never asked myself whether I was making any meaningful contribution to the world. And now I find myself thinking about the tenants on my estates, the workers in my mills, the families who depend on my decisions for their livelihoods. You have shown me that privilege comes with responsibility, that power should be used to help rather than simply to accumulate more power. Evangeline felt tears gather in her eyes at his words. Marcus, you give me too much credit. You were always a good man. I simply helped you see it. You helped me become the man I wanted to be, rather than the man I thought I had to be, Marcus corrected. Evangeline, Whatever challenges we face because of our marriage, I will never regret choosing love over convenience, happiness over safety, even if it costs you everything else you value. Nothing else I value matters compared to you, Marcus said without hesitation. Evangeline, you are my wife, my duchess, my heart's desire. I would rather be a disgraced duke married to the woman I love than a respected duke living alone in his fortress. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Mrs. Crawford, whose expression suggested news of considerable importance. Your Grace, she said with obvious concern, I have received word that Sir Reginald Worthington has arrived in the village and is requesting an audience with you tomorrow morning. He says it is a matter of honor that cannot be delayed. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter weather. A matter of honor? I believe he intends to challenge you to a duel, Your Grace, Mrs. Crawford said with obvious distress. He has been telling anyone who will listen that you stole his intended bride and destroyed his reputation. He seems determined to seek satisfaction. Evangeline gasped, her face going pale with fear. Marcus, he cannot be serious. Dueling is illegal, but not unknown among men who feel their honor has been impugned, Marcus said grimly. Evangeline, Sir Reginald is a dangerous man who has killed 2 opponents in previous duels. He is not making idle threats. Then you must refuse to meet him, Evangeline said urgently. Marcus, there is no honor in risking your life over the wounded pride of a man who wanted to force me into an unwanted marriage. If I refuse his challenge, I will be branded a coward, Marcus pointed out. Evangeline, my reputation would be destroyed more thoroughly by avoiding a duel than by losing one. Your reputation matters less to me than your life, Evangeline said fiercely. Marcus, I will not lose you to satisfy the bloodlust of a man who views women as property to be bought and sold. Marcus took her hands in his, feeling their trembling as she struggled to control her emotions. Evangeline, I will not seek this confrontation, but if it comes, I will not run from it. I am a good shot and I have faced danger before. Sir Reginald may find that he has chosen the wrong opponent. Promise me, Evangeline said, her violet eyes bright with unshed tears. Promise me that you will try to resolve this without violence. Promise me that you will not throw your life away for the sake of pride. I promise that I will do everything possible to avoid bloodshed, Marcus said solemnly. But Evangeline, I also promise that I will not allow Sir Reginald to intimidate us or to make our lives unbearable through threats and harassment. One way or another, this matter will be resolved. As they held each other in the firelight, both understanding that their happiness hung in the balance of a confrontation that could destroy everything they had built together, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. He had found love where he least expected it, with a woman who had appeared in his life as suddenly as a snowstorm, and had transformed his understanding of what it meant to be truly alive. Now that love was being threatened by forces beyond their control, by men who viewed marriage as a business transaction and honor as something to be defended with blood. But Marcus was no longer the isolated duke who had valued safety over happiness, solitude over connection. He was a man in love, a husband determined to protect his wife, a duke who had learned that some things were worth fighting for, regardless of the cost. Tomorrow would bring Sir Reginald's challenge and the confrontation that would determine their future. But tonight, Marcus held his wife in his arms and knew that whatever the morning might bring, he had already won the only victory that truly mattered, the love of a remarkable woman who had taught him that the greatest risks often brought the greatest rewards. The duke, who had sworn never to marry, had discovered that some vows were meant to be broken, and that love could indeed arrive as suddenly as snow, transforming everything it touched and making even the coldest heart burn with warmth and life. 1 year later, the spring morning dawned clear and bright over Thornfield Estate, the gardens bursting with new life that seemed to celebrate the transformation that had occurred within the ancient walls of the manor house. Marcus stood at the window of the nursery, watching his wife tend to their infant daughter, while their son played at her feet with wooden toys that Marcus had carved during the long winter evenings. The confrontation with Sir Reginald had never materialized. Faced with Marcus's calm refusal to be intimidated and the united support of those who knew Evangeline's true character, Sir Reginald had retreated to his estates to nurse his wounded pride in private. Lord Ashworth, deprived of his ally and faced with the legal reality of Evangeline's marriage, had eventually accepted the situation with grudging grace. "Marcus," Evangeline said, looking up from the baby with the radiant smile that never failed to make his heart race, "you look thoughtful this morning. What occupies your mind?" "I was thinking about the day I found you in the snow," Marcus replied, moving to sit beside her on the comfortable chair they had placed near the window. I was thinking about how completely my life changed in that single moment. Do you regret it? Evangeline asked, echoing a question that had become a ritual between them. The chaos, the scandal, the upheaval of all your carefully ordered plans? Never, Marcus said without hesitation, reaching out to touch his daughter's tiny hand. Evangeline, you brought life to Thornfield in ways I never imagined possible. Not just our children, but joy, warmth, purpose, everything that makes a house a home. And you gave me safety, love, and the freedom to be myself, rather than what others expected me to be, Evangeline replied. Marcus, I still sometimes marvel that a snowstorm could lead to such happiness. Not just any snowstorm, Marcus corrected with a grin. The particular snowstorm that brought the most stubborn, most remarkable woman in England to my doorstep and forced me to confront everything I thought I knew about love and marriage. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Mrs. Crawford, who brought news that would have seemed impossible a year earlier. Your Grace, she said with obvious pleasure, Lord Ashworth has arrived for his monthly visit with his great-niece and great-nephew. He seems particularly eager to see how young Master Thomas is progressing with his walking. Marcus and Evangeline exchanged amused glances. Lord Ashworth's transformation from bitter enemy to doting great-uncle had been one of the most unexpected developments of their first year of marriage. Faced with the reality of Evangeline's happiness and the undeniable charm of his great-grandchildren, he had gradually abandoned his hostility in favor of grudging acceptance and eventually genuine affection. Please show him up, Evangeline said warmly. And Mrs. Crawford asked Cook to prepare his favorite tea cakes. You know how he pretends not to enjoy them while eating half the plate. As Lord Ashworth entered the nursery, his stern expression softening as he caught sight of the children, Marcus reflected on the power of love to transform even the most unlikely relationships. Uncle, Evangeline said, rising to greet him with genuine warmth. How lovely to see you. Thomas has been asking for his great-uncle all morning. Has he indeed? Lord Ashworth said, his voice gruff with emotion as he scooped up the toddling boy. And what has young Master Thomas been learning since my last visit? He can say horse quite clearly now, Marcus reported with obvious pride, and he shows remarkable determination in his efforts to climb everything in sight. A true Blackwood, Lord Ashworth observed with approval, stubborn, fearless, and entirely too clever for his own good. As they spent the morning together, watching the children play and discussing the improvements that Marcus and Evangeline had implemented on the estate, it was hard to remember that this man had once been their bitter enemy. Your Grace, Lord Ashworth said as his visit drew to a close, I owe you an apology that is long overdue. I was wrong about your marriage, wrong about Evangeline's character, wrong about what would make her happy. Uncle, Evangeline said gently, you were trying to protect me in the only way you knew how. I understand that now, even if I could not accept it then. You were wiser than I was, Lord Ashworth admitted with obvious difficulty. Evangeline, you found love where I saw only inconvenience, happiness where I saw only scandal. I am proud of the woman you have become and the life you have built. After Lord Ashworth's departure, Marcus and Evangeline found themselves alone in the garden, where they had taken so many walks during those early days of their courtship. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if that storm had not struck? Evangeline asked as they strolled among the roses that were just beginning to bloom. If I had reached my destination safely, if we had never met? I try not to think about such possibilities, Marcus replied with a shudder. Evangeline, I cannot imagine my life without you in it. The thought of continuing as I was, isolated, bitter, convinced that solitude was preferable to love, is almost unbearable. And I cannot imagine accepting the marriage Uncle had arranged, living a life of quiet desperation with a man who viewed me as property rather than a partner. Evangeline stopped walking and turned to face him directly. Marcus, we saved each other, didn't we? You rescued me from the snow, but I rescued you from a life without love. We rescued each other, Marcus agreed, pulling her into his arms despite the possibility that the gardeners might see them. Evangeline, you taught me that the greatest risks often bring the greatest rewards, that love is worth fighting for regardless of the obstacles. And you taught me that true strength comes from vulnerability, that opening one's heart to another person is not weakness, but the greatest courage of all. As they kissed in the garden where their love had first bloomed, surrounded by the evidence of the life they had built together, both understood that their story had become something larger than either had imagined possible. The Duke, who had sworn never to marry, had discovered that some vows were meant to be broken, that love could indeed arrive as suddenly as snow, and that the woman who had appeared unconscious in his courtyard had been exactly what his heart needed, even when his mind had been too stubborn to admit it. Their marriage had begun with a rescue in a snowstorm, but it had become a partnership that transformed not just their own lives, but the lives of everyone around them. They had proven that love could overcome legal obstacles, social prejudice, and family opposition when two people were willing to fight for what they believed in. "Marcus," Evangeline said as they made their way back toward the house where their children waited, "do you remember what you said about not wanting a wife?" "I remember being a fool who thought he could live without love," Marcus replied with a rueful smile. "Evangeline, I thank God every day that you collapsed in my courtyard and forced me to confront my own stupidity." "I did not collapse deliberately," Evangeline protested with mock indignation. "No, but you fell in love with me deliberately," Marcus countered. "Despite my coldness, my resistance, my determination to remain alone, you saw something in me that I had forgotten existed." "I saw a man who needed to be loved as much as I needed to love him," Evangeline said simply. "Marcus, we were meant to find each other, storm or no storm. Love has a way of creating its own opportunities." As they entered Thornfield together, their children's laughter echoing through the halls that had once been silent and cold, Marcus marveled at the truth of her words. Love had indeed created its own opportunities, transforming a chance encounter in a snowstorm into a marriage that had changed everything they thought they knew about happiness, partnership, and the courage required to open one's heart completely. The Duke, who had not wanted a wife, had discovered that he could not live without the remarkable woman who had fainted in the snow outside his stables and taught him that the greatest adventures began with the most unexpected arrivals. Their love story had started with a rescue, but it had become a testament to the power of two hearts brave enough to choose each other against all odds and wise enough to know that some storms brought exactly what was needed, even when it arrived in the most unlikely packages. If this tale of unexpected love born from winter's storm, of hearts that learned to melt despite the cold, and of a rescue that saved two souls instead of one touched your heart, please give this video a like and subscribe to our channel for more enchanting historical romances. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Would you have had the courage to open your home to a mysterious stranger? Could you have trusted love that arrived so suddenly and unexpectedly? Your engagement helps us bring you more stories where fate intervenes in the most dramatic ways and proves that sometimes the most beautiful love stories begin with the most unlikely circumstances. Thank you for joining us in the snow-covered halls of Thornfield Estate. And until our next romantic tale unfolds, remember that love, like snow, can arrive without warning and transform everything it touches into something beautiful and new.